Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's exclusive chat show. I'm Tripti. I'll be your moderator for today's session. Whether you're an educator, school leader, or someone passionate about effective learning, you are in for an enlightening discussion session. We often hear about teaching strategies, but how often do we ask ourselves, how does the brain actually learn? Today, we will unravel the mysteries of the mind and explore how neuroscience-backed strategies can revolutionize the way we teach or facilitate. To guide us through this journey, we have a remarkable thought leader in education, a change maker with over 4 decades of experience. She is a visionary in the field of learning, a mentor to institutions, and a global educationist and strategist. It is an honor to introduce Dr. Lakshmi Kumar, a name synonymous with innovative in education.
Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am. So Dr. Kumar is a distinguished educationist and intercultural coach with an extensive background in school education, leadership, and capacity building. Currently, serving as the school director at Apsara Academy, she is also mentors to various schools, and her contributions as a founder director to the Orchid schools, which she nurtured into a highly reputed institutions over 20 years, have left an indelible mark on the educational landscape. Her expertise span establishing high-quality schools, refining educational processes, and developing impactful teacher training programs. A pioneer in international Sweden-India education collaborations, Dr. Kumar has trained teachers and social workers globally for over 3 decades. She is a specialist in social emotional learning, inclusion, life skill education, and interdisciplinary curriculum development. Additionally, as a cross-cultural training consultant, she has worked extensively with international assignees and leveraging her deep understanding of multicultural and educational environment. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from a leader who has transformed teacher development and global education collaboration. So please join me in welcoming the inspiring and visionary Dr. Lakshmi Kumar.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Tripti, for such an extensive and a generous introduction. One always is a bit concerned when the bar is set so high, and I don't know if I can really, meet the expectations. And I love the topic because I think it's really time that we as professional educators understand the science of teaching and learning. So many of you may have heard about this, it's also a very important, interesting idea that I want to promote. So I just last October, I attended the Nobel Prize Museum and Swedish Institute's collaboration. It's a teacher summit. And one of the very, very core theme of that summit, one-day summit, and of course, for international teachers, they had given an extended program. It was about understanding the whole way the brain, the wonder called brain that works. And I think the more we try to explore, we realize the less we know. Since it's a very short half an hour chat show, without really jumping into the neuroscience aspects of the learning, I thought, since we are educators, based on what the neuroscience says, and also demystifying some of our ideas of how brain functions and thus learns, I put a bit of how we can navigate this extremely vast and very contextual and very contemporary topic. So I want to share a presentation, and don't worry about if in case you miss a word here or there. I have told Tripti that I will share this presentation so that all the participants can also, kind of explore the vastness of this post our meeting. Visible to everyone. There's been a big conversation and discussions of late among the pedagogical researchers and pedagogical leaders about whether we should really embed a lot of our teaching strategies to uh, research or science. The thin line between research and science is that science repeatedly researches and it hypothesizes and it tests on a wide and diverse community of learners. And it also challenges itself to a whole lot of variations and deviations, and then it kind of brings it as some kind of a core scientific principle. So one of the things that, for example, in the summit that we were very, very clearly warned is do not jump into a research that gets quoted often that this research says so. Those of you who are interested in the video, and a lot of Nobel laureates made presentations, you can check it out on the Nobel Laureate Teacher Summit. The next summit is in March, but now henceforth every year the summit will happen in March. What can you make out of this? It looks like some kind of different people can have different interpretation, which is also why I love the way the brain operates. If you can use one or two of the interpretations of what is this, can someone just, how do you see this image? Well, it can look like a crocodile, it can look like a, seashore, it can look like a moon crater, it can look like some kind of a water pool in which some oil is floating. So you can have an extremely diverse understanding of the image, which is how oftentimes our students perceive the curriculum, they perceive or experience the content. It looks like some kind of a blurb, vague idea that is also given different opportunities for interpretation. On one level, all these interpretations or the meaning that I give to the image is very right. And it also leads me as a facilitator to ask the students, where is this interpretation coming from? What's the context? So we also can explore the students' world. But if we want to drive a very clearly directional understanding of this image, just look at this. The minute I give some kind of a shape, some kind of an outline, suddenly there is a Dalmatian that appears, right? And then you suddenly can see, yeah, that looks like some kind of a river, a water, and Dalmatian, this dog is going and sipping water, and maybe that other side is of the river, there is a little tree. So you can create a whole lot of new meaning out of what was considered a very, very generic blurb. And I want you to think about learning like this, that when you spread the whole landscape of learning to your students, do allow them the interpretation of where they are and gently and clearly direct them to what you want them to. It's a very simplified notion of how the whole jumble suddenly makes new sense. So I just want to highlight the four very clearly, highly essential personal competencies. What I know, which is really the cognitive. How I learn is the metacognitive. Why I learn, because this is very important, because a lot of time in our cognitive overload theories and metacognitive understanding, we forget the last two, or we kind of think about less about the last two competencies, which is why I learn, and of course how I relate to it. Because if I do not relate to the content, to my context, if I do not relate the historical narrative that has happened to why I even need to learn, if I do not connect with it at some kind of a social emotional level, the learning stays incomplete. what do we want our students to do when they come to the classroom? And, this is where I want us to again go back to the fundamentals of the teacher, not on the stage, but students at the whole center of our universe, is to surely take ownership of their learning and help them identify the strategies, because the brain has certain learning mechanisms, storing mechanisms, recall mechanisms, and reproduction mechanisms. And if we can help our students to identify so that they can attain their learning goals, and we definitely believe that students' agency at the center of it is to become more and more self-directed, so that they can actually be in charge of completing their tasks. And it's interesting that we are struggling every day today with our students' engagement on these directions. And critically, very important, especially for cognitive understanding, is to reflect on the effectiveness. How did I learn this? Was it repetitive? Was it more associative? Was it an elaborate example? Or was it something that I could contextualize? And very importantly, while they are doing this, that what kind of assessment methods would help me? What kind of assessment methods that I can actually build on? Meaning that I can actually decide the criteria to evaluate my own learning goals. These are at a very, very classroom-centric models. So how do we put this into practice? I have 4 clear dimensions to guide you through. Is the pre-assessment. Remember, I showed you the first picture, which is like a very jumbled, just a landscape, is to encourage students to examine their current thinking. So when you are talking about a new chapter, a new content, new concept, very important thing is to dwell on few minutes of what do I already know about this topic that could guide my learning. Because the purpose is not about how much do you know, how well can I relate to, how well can I contextualize, how well can I associate. And one of the very, very important, practice I feel is the what I call identifying the muddiest points, and it works very well with senior students. Is what was very confusing about the material that I explored in class today. Putting their hands on, is it the formula, or is it the how we have derived the formula? Is it the conceptual understanding, or is it the definition of it, or is it the application of this, let's say, this particular verb, and how do I do it? So I think very, very important. And for all you know, many students will have very similar, but more importantly, you kind of have a whole class covering almost all the muddiest points that are possible. And I love this. This gives an opportunity for us to turn the class around to seeing your teaching from their point of view. So it's almost like, what was confusing for you? And then it's also an amazing empathic perspective of seeing it from their point of view. Very, very important. Followed by this is the retrospective post assessments. You have done it and you've had a whole lot of conversations, discussions in the classroom, and students have had a lot of formative assessments and a lot of quiz and everything, but very clearly directed is to push your students to recognize a conceptual change. Especially before you showed me the Dalmatian, I thought the landscape or the black dots were this, but when you showed me the Dalmatian, I had the aha moment, but also I could see how close I was or how far I was. Not right or wrong, but to be able to say, I thought evolution was this, but now I know what is evolution. Or how has my thinking changed over time? This is what we would call as actually over a period actually measuring the progress of students' learning. The last one, of course, is very, very important for us is to how do I document it in my reflective journals? Is that especially post assessments, I think if when you give back the assessment sheets, if you could ask the students to even make these notes as to what was it that went well and what is that I could do differently and what is that that did not work well. Now, when I put these 4 points together, I'm actually slowly guiding students to actually a lot of self moderation on the taxonomy, which is so fantastic, I can tell you, is to give students license to identify the confusions within the classroom. Because in the cognitive landscape, in the way that brain functions, we need to kind of create some kind of a structured way in which we can measure what's happening in the classroom so that they know that how they can kind of separate the confusion from the clarity. And, some of the subject that really requires reflections into the coursework, is both oral and written as students finding the challenges that are there in the whole assignment. And of course, teacher herself or himself can actually model this whole thing of the thinking process involved in the field. Probably say, when I was going to talk about evolution, this is how I thought I would structure it. And I came to the classroom. When I saw you, responding to your prior knowledge, based on your prior knowledge, I realized that the classroom has some insights. So actually, I decided to show a short movie clipping and how I kept checking my work to see whether I'm actually addressing the need of the classroom. This is a very quick review. All of you know, my dear teachers, my dear educational leaders, is when does the cognitive overload occurs? And despite our awareness, when I read it, is our classrooms are overloaded with these practices. And I think once again, becoming conscious of, is when a student attempts to talk or listen when copying or reading from the board, because we believe that, there has been a big, one of the other demystification that happened during this summit is that multitasking is extremely overloading and very interfering with the learning to the extent, as you can see now in UK, there are a lot of schools that have actually banned the digital device because the students are not able to have a focus on the digital device and do their assignments. Or to some extent, Sweden is now going back to throwing all the digital devices and bringing back a hardcore textbooks to the classroom and saying, hold the book, feel it, and open it and read it. So there is something about this cognitive overload and our idea of students being fantastic with multitasking. This is a demystified phenomenon. The second one is the information presented visually, Nowadays, I'm also often going as inspector to a lot of schools in Middle East and sometimes as an evaluator here. One of the menaces of the LMS is this, that as soon as the teacher comes, she greets the class and she puts on the, laptop and there is the smart board and then there is visual. And some of the visuals, and then a lot of time she's kind of, it's so decided and it's pre-written that without even thinking about it, she puts on the objectives and she reads it, she puts on the learning outcome, she reads it, and then ta-da, there is a video. And the video sometimes is in the cartoon form, even for older students. And I find this very, very distractive because you haven't given the brain to even pause to say, what is this topic? Where have I seen this? Where have I experienced this? And why am I learning? None of that. But it is so full of, visual images and moving. And then there is sometimes a silly background music happening. And that actually really robs our students of a whole lot of focus. The third one is if the task requires a lot of unrelated prior knowledge to be recalled simultaneously. Sometimes we teachers start with a good intent of introducing the topic and giving them some quiz or giving them probably the sequentiality of the prior knowledge checking. But sometimes we get so stuck with that the students actually lose their interest in what comes next. And sometimes we know there are teachers who love storytelling as a pedagogy, but our stories just go from moon to sun to probably to the underworld, that our students are very, very lost. And also getting them back to the focus of today becomes an issue. And the fourth one is uh, that if the task is too complex for the expertise of the learner, which is what we talk about, age appropriate, relevant, and also in terms of skill appropriateness, and if there are differentiated learners in the classroom. And this is something very important, that if our task is too complex, for especially for science students, they do experience cognitive overload. This again is just a very simple three-part framework. I'm not dwelling so much in it. But what is important to understand for you as teachers is it is difficult to really control or capture or have some kind of a grip on what's happening inside our students' mind, which is the intrinsic load, which is why social emotional is very important, that our students come in, they are very motivated, they are excited, and that they're going to work collaboratively, so that to some extent you can moderate the intrinsic, kind of the load, the cognitive load. However, what is in our hand, which is again, I'm connecting into the brain of the neuroscience theory, is the extraneous cognitive load, is that how we can manipulate creative pedagogies, how we can actually steer the classroom learning and keeping it quite simple, student-centric, students engaged, and around the students' knowledge systems, so that we can actually, reduce the extrinsic load by creating this kind of a pedagogical discourse, and that students can invest more effort and resources into increasing their germane, what we call the cognitive resources that can directly enhance the learning. So how do we reduce the extraneous cognitive load? These are some quick tips for teachers, is how we present the learning material. You remember I told you about the LMS. Please take a pause before you press the play button. And sometimes I've seen using the language, the accent of the voice in the videos are not even comprehensible. Many times we use very alien visuals that are culturally inappropriate. So be very, very clear about how learning materials are presented. I must say this, in one of the classes, I saw that entire time the teacher was trying to kind of teach the fraction through the elements, that she hardly did any step-by-step board work. She didn't even realize that she could have segmented it. And while there is a, kind of a video playing, she could have paused and actually shown. And of course, more importantly, actually shown with, things that are in the classroom or an apple or whatever, to show actually how it can be happening. So I think this is very important for us, is evaluate how your learning materials are presented. Okay. The second is very, very important, is the physical learning environment. Today, there is a huge, field of cognitive science that talks about how the physical space and how the, the noise level and how or sometimes the kind of visuals, of distractions that are happening inside or outside our classroom can also be something that can actually affect the way students learn. And I'm not saying you can control everything, but you can minimize the distractions. The third one is to provide opportunities to activate prior knowledge. And I think this should be a starting point of a lot of conceptual introductions, because students do not come as blank slate or empty heads. They come from real world, and they also have their lived in experiences. And how about giving an opportunity for students to share that actually? For example, during the COVID time, in the economics class, I remember asking the students, because first time I think they actually saw the home economics in dynamic action. Instead of saying that that's not in my syllabus, how about starting with how does it work? Do you observe? And also what I really like about this point is, if you continue to do this, activating the prior knowledge, students actually know what you're expecting. They do become more observant, more curious, more questioning. And I remember this, students didn't know about, for example, when we did a financial literacy program, students had no clue about their families' financial status, what are the mutual funds, how much of loan is there on their home, what is the percentage of the EMI, the interest that they were paying, and what's the salary for their maid, and what happened to the maid who, if we didn't give salary during COVID. You're talking about an expansive understanding of the topic that you're introducing. And students actually begin to, sometimes, I used to say, okay, we are now going to talk about this in the next one. And I want you to think about 3 pointers for you to know. You have actually activated the curiosity of the students to do some pre-research and or pre-reading, or sometimes just a dining table conversations about what do you think, why don't you put salt in while the potatoes are boiling, and why only afterwards. So a lot of these small things. The next one is, this is something that I find teachers sometimes don't understand, that there is a way to sequence the lesson and that there is a very clear flow that we need to do. Because the brain operates in a way that it understands and registers certain sequence, and it's kind of almost like a storyline. You don't start with, the middle and then the end, and then you go to the beginning. So I think very important, look at your sequencing of the lesson. How are you introducing it? How are you bringing the main theme during the actual lesson delivery? And how are you actually asking students to apply it? And what are the examples are you giving? And how are you actually formulating a very quick formative assessment or very quick check-in kind of? And students would see this, that there is a structure and there is a flow. And the last but very, very important is, how do we surface the metacognition in lessons? Okay, is to help the students to understand the extraneous load, and that they can actually really can synthesize a whole lot of cognitive resources if they can be really redirected to the germane load of the task. I like this, and I think we should, it's a very quick, where are we our students? There are two ways, are our students cognitively passive, which is often the case. What do they do? And today our students sometimes are not even reading the text before. Remember, we used to practice. We used to make a mind map. We used to have a flow chart. We used to have some kind of key concepts as a jigsaw puzzle. Or we used to have, let's say, in certain, organic flow, we will have a sequence of each of the pieces. But our students, what do they do a lot of time? They say, I read the assigned text and I highlighted the text. And that's how cognitively passive. But if we can help our students to move from that to cognitively active study behavior, which is to say, how does it work? Why does it work this way? And students are actually writing their own study questions. You remember this very famous saying that a student who is able to question very well is the one who can also answer very well. And also to say, how does all these small pieces of puzzles or pieces of facts fit into the bigger picture? And that how did I recall? Did I recall a visual mental picture that I took as a photo? Or do I recall some key components of it? Or do I recall in a way that I'm only at a very core taxonomy level of I can just ratomaro the definition? Which is the last part of the outcome of the second, when we promote our students to cognitively active study habits, is actually our students can see. Oh, by the way, I actually took my grade 9, 10, 11, 12 students through the whole taxonomy in a very fun way. And so they actually begin to map themselves as to where are they in the taxonomy. Oh, I can just about recall, whether it's history or sign or, underline, contrast, compare. Or am I able to move to application level? I think this is very important, that you're actually giving them the tool, and every time they can measure where they are progressing or where they need to progress, when they understand that I am at from a recall level or a comprehension level, I am actually able to do some analysis. This is a brilliant way you actually can help your students to study also. Going from the cognitive overload, just to quickly give two metacognition component is that certain level of awareness and certain levels of regulation. And I love this because self-regulation is something that we have kind of failed our students. We've been kind of so spoon feeding. We've been kind of constantly bringing discipline and regulations, or everything is kind of a trigger and a response kind of conditioning that we have gotten our students. If we can push for the regulation of this kind, the awareness is about the students, as I mentioned to you, where they are in the taxonomy, what are the metacognitive processes that they know and how they can improve. And while you're doing that, you kind of scaffold it to the regulation of how do they manage their mental processes. There are some students who are very good with self-reflection. And this is another exercise I have done it, that before you go for an assessment, you ask the students to actually map their goals and also evaluate that in this assessment, these are the chapters or these are the concepts that are coming, and these are the concepts I'm very high, green, code. And these are the concepts I'm kind of wobbly, but I know it. But these are the concepts I'm still very insecure or unsure about, a red line. So actually the students are able to realize a kind of a SWOT analysis, but in a way that they can actually accordingly plan and do the evaluation. Again, just to integrate the strategies into our everyday teaching is to have an explicit teaching, because we have all kinds of diverse learners, wherein there is a lot of ample opportunities for independent practice and reflection, and supporting students to plan, monitor, evaluate. And I'm just going back to this regulation. Remember that the more we help our students to self-regulate, we are actually helping our students with agency, but more importantly, also someone who can actually work on what you would call it an independent study time is very constructively used. And the third one is something very critical for me, helping students to develop rubrics or co-design with them. Here is a project I'm going to give you. How do you want me to evaluate? What are the parameters that I should put? And you don't have to do it for every assignment, every project. You do it one or two, they actually start doing it themselves. So if you were to guide the students and co-design a rubric on which that the students can actually evaluate how they have learned. And definitely the rubrics can be on the lines of SMART goals. The most effective strategy I feel is that teachers modeling thinking, is to the whole think aloud strategy we all use, right? And in that, we can actually help children to kind of recall how they can answer and how we can solve problems. And here again, you can see a whole lot of taxonomy is used. Again, we can say, is this answer at a very core recall level, or do you think this answer is actually going to the levels of 2 or 3 or 4? And nothing like questioning, helping students build questions. At Orchid School, we had done this, that after every concept or every unit is done, students are working in a group. They write the questions, or they write the fill in the blanks, they write MCQs, they write diagrammatic representations. So they make a paper, and as a teacher, you compile it, and your test papers are always coming from that. You might have to just modify or format something, and students find it amazing fun, and also it's really thrilling for them. Oh my god, this is a question that I constructed, and now I am going to actually be writing this as an answer paper. I think nothing like students actually building an assessment sheet through this concept of questions.
Absolutely. Well said, ma'am. And we know that there is so much more we could learn from you, but due to time constraints, we will have to bring today's session to a close.
Sorry, do we stop? Do I stop now?
No, that's okay, ma'am. Just you have still some time.
Yeah, I just have maybe a couple of slides. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm not highlighting this, but I think teachers, we have to be very, very mindful of the learning objectives, because learning objective is very clearly directional, very clearly goal oriented, and sharing the learning objectives with the students really help because they can evaluate. Also the learning outcomes, the difference between the learning objective and outcomes, I won't go into it, but also the learning outcome has very clearly a success criteria. It very clearly has some kind of a rubric for measuring progress. Imagine if you were to give this grid to your students and say that, insert the question from further back. So you're talking about actually moderating your brain to an immediate recall, a distant recall, and far away distant recall. And you can design this in so many different ways based on taxonomy. So I just thought this would be a nice model. Insert a question based on content from 2 weeks ago. And always give the blueprint and probably use the QR code so students can independently revise or further develop their skills. And, with the AI tool and a whole lot of support from technology, this is something that students can actually create and use for evaluating. And of course, enrich the learning, because brain does get into this cognitive overload of a monotony, also a fatigue. So just remember to make the classroom very dynamic, collaborative, cooperative, sometimes work alone, sometimes work in pair, and also through a whole lot of multiple exposures. And most important, as I had mentioned to you, is questioning. Students, when they raise questions, or when they are able to contribute to the whole pool of questions, we're actually saying that we value their learning, because in the question there is always a learning that stays. And of course, the loop is complete only when you provide feedback. Yeah, I spoke about the reflection and how you can plan, and the whole lot of sequence of reflection. And this would be interesting at some point of the time, middle of the year, take time to do a little bit of a SWOT. Students himself or herself can go through this, a whole lot of SWOT about their own, because we're talking about a whole lot of agency here. and writing down your work. Instead of saying I study math, I say no, I solve math sums, or I studied science. Instead, I actually worked out a formulae, and I actually did a whole lot of drawing. Okay. And very important is that when learners think about their thinking, they are more capable of self-improvement. And remember, the metacognitive practices or strategies are learned and practiced. And I think it helps our students into very, very thinking oriented, and their learning also becomes largely self-driven and self-motivated and very intrinsic. That's what I have.
Thank you, ma'am. And as we conclude today's insightful session on the learning of science, we have uncovered powerful strategies to make learning more effective, engaging, and brain-friendly. From understanding cognitive load to the power of retrieval practice and metacognition, it's clear that the way we teach can truly transform students' outcome. And a key takeaway is that learning is a process, not an event. So active management and spaced repetition and a growth mindset definitely can help students unlock their full potential. And as educators, let us continue to apply these neuroscience-backed strategies to create impactful learning experiences. And thank you to Dr. Lakshmi for sharing such valuable insights, and to our audience for their participation. We look forward to continuing this discussion on Teachers of Tomorrow platform. So stay curious, keep learning, and we will also be sharing the presentation. So stay connected with Teachers of Tomorrow for updates, and see you in our next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Shall I log out?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.